2020 was wild because we really went from really cooking. The church had grown at that point. It was probably like one Sunday, it was like 700 people in there. This is before we did online anything. And if you didn't get there on time, you just weren't gonna get a seat. It was like really busting out. And, there's this cold that people are getting in China that's actually not a cold, it's killing people. There's rumors of it hitting the shores of Seattle. And then there's a case in New York City. And then I remember the anxiety that I felt. I've talked a lot about my own mental health and anxiety and stuff. And I was trying to decide whether or not we would cancel service. And if we were to cancel it, this was like maybe a week or two before any announcement about shutdowns. So it really was a discretionary thing. I remember sitting in the office and feeling overwhelmed by anxiety, really having a panic attack, thinking I'm having a heart attack right now because I was so stressed out about this tension of I want people to know Jesus and I want to connect people to Jesus Christ and to each other. I think in my heart of hearts, I love to gather people. And so it really was going against the grain of why I got into church planting, to gather people around a mission of Jesus, around worship services, around community. This is what we've given our lives for. And I also really want people to be safe. Is this thing some monster virus that's killing people? Or is it what these other people are saying? It's not that serious, it's gonna blow over. And so later that week, things really kicked up. Instead of just being like one case, it was like, no, this thing is actually sweeping through the city. And then I think we sent that first email out that out of an abundance of caution, we're gonna suspend worship services for like the next couple of weeks, having no idea that it would be 14 months.
Welcome to episode 4 of our Renaissance Roots series. I'm Joe Garrett, production director at Renaissance. You'll hear a little bit more from me in this episode. I first met Jordan and Jessica around Easter of 2014, about 5 months before Renaissance launched weekly services. I had been attending a church in Midtown for 8 years that I was at from the beginning. After living in Harlem for 3 years, I felt called to be more connected to the neighborhood, so I left my previous church, but with one stipulation. I was not going to do the church plant thing again. But God had a different plan. While searching for a church in Harlem, I got connected with the Rices. Over Melba's fried chicken, they laid out their vision for a new faith community in Harlem. I don't remember much of what was said, but I remember being so excited by the possibilities and on the short walk home thinking, oh man, am I really going to do this church plant thing again? I'm tired. God, is this really what you want from me? And here we are, 10 years later. So we rejoin our story after 5 years of trial and error, triumphs and mistakes. Renaissance was maturing into a place of sustainability. There was a sense of momentum, and then COVID hit. Everything stopped. New York City was hit with the harsh new reality of life in a pandemic unlike anywhere else in the country, and for Renaissance, that sense of security was out the window. A core tenet of the Christian faith is trust. We sing songs, we say prayers, but being thrust into a true state of doubt, fear, and insecurity put our faith to the test. Would we fight for control, or be able to release things into God's hands, trusting He cared and would sustain our faith community?
We had to pivot really quickly because we had no online anything. We didn't have a live stream. We had just updated our website to be able to support video and things like that. It was Joe, Trip, you, trying to figure out where we could record sermons, how we would post them online, and then even how do we build an online service.
This is Trip Hampton. He's on staff as Renaissance's creative director.
I listened to an episode of The Daily. I remember calling Jordan on Wednesday afternoon and saying, we are not going to have church on Sunday. There was no way that we had to create an online service. So I said to him, I'm getting together to some people from the worship team for Thursday night. We're going to record as much music as we can so that we have it in the bag. and I think that you should record a message. And he was like, okay. And then later that night, the NBA shut down, Broadway shut down. I went to the grocery and bought a 15-pound bag of rice as if I was going on Survivor. We went to the school Thursday. They let us in. We recorded. And then you and I, Joe, we just threw as much equipment into that case as we possibly could.
Yes, which
And-
there was this giant rolling case, and someone had just donated it like 2 weeks before. And so it was just like sitting on the side of the stage. And then, yeah, that night we just pulled all the gear, whatever we could
Everything
fit.
we could, yeah.
That case probably weighed 200 pounds.
Oh, easily, probably more. But yeah, it became our lifeline. And man, you want to talk about building the plane as you fly it. That is what those first 3 months of COVID, it was just a scramble. So we got those first services put together from the stuff that we recorded that first night.
I think we
And-
went back to the auditorium a couple more times
Yeah,
to record sermons with Jordan.
before they finally kicked us out.
Right. This is Aswan and Heather Morris talking with Jessica. They were part of the core team that launched Renaissance. Aswan still preaches and is on the board. Heather is a key part of the worship team.
Heather and I were able to grab a co-op here in Harlem. It was February, so I was trying to stunt and be like, yo, this is your Valentine's Day gift. We closed on February 14th.
We celebrated with dinner, or
Celebrated
lunch
with
at Maison.
dinner at
Maison.
Maison. I remember that. I was hype. And then, of course, in March, the world shuts down. And so we can't move in. And it's ours, but it's completely empty.
I remember talking to Trip. I was like, the apartment is empty. And it was like, click, click, click. And next thing you know, we bought some plants,
Right.
some things. We got
Right.
some lights.
A little
and
stool or
a
A
little
little
stool,
stool, a little
a
AC.
fake plant, an AC,
Yo.
and the little pink stool that is still in our daughter's room.
Yep.
And we recorded in there for how many weeks?
How many months?
Months. It was
Months.
months.
Over a month?
Yeah.
Yes, because we weren't.
It wasn't
able
till
to
the end of
move
the
in
year.
Until the end of the year.
Tanya did a whole summer
VBS.
VBS in there in
Right.
different sections. Different
Right.
people
Sets.
came at different times. Yo, it was
Yeah.
crazy. People were wondering what the heck was happening
And people
in
were
that
like,
place.
where is this? Well, the mystery is solved. It was our apartment, our empty apartment.
Yep.
Made it into our own studio. Joe was very gracious with us. We were all scared to be in the same space together. I think that we made a rule that no more than two people could be in there at a time.
That's right. I would go and set up the gear ahead of time.
So we would call and he would say, press this button, make sure it's pointed here. This setting should be like this and it should look this way. And we just
Yeah,
did
yeah,
our best to
that's-
figure it out. And then again, the same thing happened where I saw Karina Oshiro out. Karina owned Common Good, a coffee shop in Harlem. They were open for limited hours in limited ways. And so most of the time that space was empty. So she said, if we can help, if you can use the space, let me know. And so eventually Heather and Aswan decided that they did need to move into their new apartment. So we put everything back in our giant case and lugged it over to Common Good. And we were there for 8 months or something. It was a long time that we filmed there.
Yeah, crazy. People would walk in to get their afternoon coffee and see that there was essentially a whole video studio in the back of the coffee shop.
The adjective that I would use to describe that time was just dark. It was dark and heavy in the city for so many reasons. Once we moved to Common Good, we were so thankful to be in that space. But when we were recording there, we would go at night after hours. It was just me and you and Jordan, or me, you, and a singer. And it was dark. It was nighttime. And it just felt like, okay, here we go. We're going to try and do this. And it was just so hard, you know? I mean, I felt
Yeah.
so bad for Jordan trying to talk to the camera.
I get all my energy from the spirit of the living God and the people in the room. I'm an extrovert. I love people. I love to be around people. I can't imagine going back to just the online only recordings. We go and record every single time, no matter what the message was, no matter how well it went across, no matter how many people viewed it. I would just walk home depressed every single night. I would never take an Uber home. I would just walk. And it didn't matter what the weather was. I just had to walk away the sadness for 20 blocks. It was such an isolating time. It felt like, why am I even doing this? A big part of my preaching, I think, is discernment in the moment. I'm constantly asking myself, like, Lord, where are you? Like, how are you leading me right now in this moment? What should I say? I know what I have written down, but I really do want to be sensitive to the Holy Spirit in the present moment, not to preach a brand new sermon, but sometimes I'm like, oh, I should just stay on this point. Or I know I had this written down, and I'm just going to just read 2 sentences and just move on, because this is actually the point for the moment for these people right here. So online, I had no discernment because I just wasn't present with anybody. So that was tough.
It was really difficult and really dark and hard. And the light of it was that it did feel like, even though we couldn't necessarily feel the benefits of being in the room together, we were showing up in people's houses once a week to give them a little bit of hope, a little bit of peace, a little bit of a reminder of this life that they didn't have at that moment. So that part was the one gift that it felt important.
Yeah, absolutely. Sitting at home all week, editing a service wasn't that fun.
It wasn't fun, no.
But we did see that a lot of people were tuning in and connecting, and people would post on social media Sunday mornings with their family watching the service. That's really what got me through feeling like this is important. What we're doing, I felt it was meaningful. It was helping people to stay connected to the community. We do a lot of things at Renaissance, but gathering on a Sunday morning is one of the most important things that we do as a church. It is formational. That experience of worship within community, receiving good teaching, it's a huge deal. And so trying to create some element of that, it still feel meaningful.
Yeah, there's so many studies about what happens when we gather together, especially with music. Our hearts start literally physiologically, we start breathing together and our hearts start beating together. It's a real thing that we have done for thousands of years, to gather together and to tell stories and to sing. And it was really heartbreaking to miss that during that time.
This is Brian and Matthew. Bri started watching Renaissance during the pandemic and is now what we would consider a super volunteer.
Those first online services, I will admit, was really strange. We were going through the pandemic, so there was so much uncertainty and so much fear and trepidation about just anything. So having church online, while strange, did also feel comforting to have something that felt like normal, even though it was absolutely not normal at all. It felt strange, but it also felt at home. It's such a strange thing to put words into now, almost 4 years later. I was really appreciative so much of what the team at Renaissance did to try to still make it feel like a full worship service, that we were part of this larger community that was all experiencing this pandemic, all in different ways, together, that we weren't alone. And as much as I was isolating myself in so many ways, those online services, while strange, was a really beautiful way for me to just be with God authentically, especially during a time that was incredibly scary.
I remember waking up and just thinking, this is really crazy. I feel like I'm living through a bad dream, hearing sirens nonstop. Watching the news, and in Elmhurst early in the pandemic, they just had like mobile morgues outside because it was just too full in the hospital, and just trucks with refrigeration outside.
We had someone in our community whose older sister, she had passed away from COVID. You had to officiate her Zoom funeral when even at a gravesite, you couldn't have more than 8 people spaced out outside. And just the unknown, I think everybody who was in New York City in particular knows what it was like to wipe down groceries,
Yeah, that was a wild era. To clean a Cinnamon Toast Crunch box is a wild thing to do.
Yeah, and it just felt like COVID was everywhere in
Yes.
the air.
Like you could smell it almost.
Here's Renaissance's children's ministry director, Tanya Velado.
I remember the first week, I just sat there trying to figure out what had just happened and really not even knowing what to do. After about a week or so, I remember thinking to myself, as much as our adults need connection with each other, our kids need to have this because they are going through the same thing as our adults are. They're feeling the same emotions, and probably emotions that adults aren't even feeling in their worlds and hearts at these different ages and places. But I knew we can't not be here for our kids at this point in time. That stability for them and that connection with each other was so important. I knew my heart was for the philosophy of small groups, to lead small. I knew having a consistent adult and a consistent group of kids was important. So I began to talk to our different volunteers. I remember having a social distanced walk with 2 of our volunteers and saying, what do you think about this small group virtual idea? Would you jump on board with it? We created a tester group of what it would look like. I recruited 1 volunteer and 5 kids from Renaissance. And I remember in that small group, one little girl, probably a 4th grader, volunteered to pray. She said, "Dear God, please eradicate the coronavirus." In that moment, I thought, I don't know that I've ever prayed for God to eradicate the coronavirus. I'm praying for, help me to survive this, help me not miss my family. But she, as a 4th grader, said, "God, please eradicate the coronavirus." And she believed that God could do it. In that moment, that just cemented it for me. We've got to have these small groups for our kids. I contacted our Renaissance Kids volunteers, and we started from 3 years old. And so we had 20 volunteers and 10 small groups. The ability they had in that moment to be consistently present with the same group of children and the same leaders was able to happen on a level that I had never seen, but I had always dreamed of happening. I remember we had this small group of 4-year-olds. It was two women that led it. And one of the women traveled a lot. She was in Colorado. One time she was in Aruba. Even when she was hours time difference, she still hopped on Sundays and led her small group. They had the children bring their favorite stuffed animal. They got tours of a kid's bedroom. There was opportunities where our adults and our kids got to sink into each other's lives during those weeks.
This is Shawana Bell Richardson, Renaissance's Youth Ministry Director. Did you have a sense before starting the middle school ministry of how much people wanted it?
Yeah, I had no idea. As far as I knew, we had a thriving children's ministry. It seemed like everything was fine. I was just hanging out with Jordan. I told him I'm about to leave Young Life. And upon hearing that, Jordan was just like, "Oh, word?" And so apparently this was something on his mind for a long time. So I'm like, okay, cool. We started to take action to do that. I know that I was officially on staff in January 2020.
Gotcha.
We were scheduled to launch middle school Sunday programming on February 9th, 2020. And we did that. And it was amazing. We still got some great pictures from that day.
Shout out to Shawana Bell Richardson and how she's holding down our middle and high schoolers. That ministry is blowing up right now in the best of ways. Yeah. Our middle school ministry now is almost as big as the amount of adults that launch with our church. I mean, Shawana was a part of our core team. And I remember hearing Shawana teach one time when I was at the office. I was in the other room ear hustling like, yo, this woman is amazing. And she was working for Young Life, one of our partner organizations. And I remember thinking to myself, we need someone like her on our staff. Like, we need someone like that could really break the gospel down to kids in the neighborhood. And she has such a huge heart for our middle schoolers. I remember one time I made a joke about middle school ministry and how difficult it was. And Shawana came the next day with a word of correction for your boy. If it's difficult for you, keep that to yourself, because like we need people who are passionate and feel called to this. So please do not discourage this incredibly vital and necessary ministry. And I was like, heard you. I apologize. Since that day, I've stayed in my lane, because, you know, our oldest is about to be in middle school pretty soon. And I pray for that ministry all the time.
Yeah.
I pray that he finds Jesus in that ministry.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, it was a lot of newness, a lot of excitement. Even though I had been going to Renaissance for so long, I actually did not know the families. I did not know the students. Everyone was very new to me. In addition to starting new programming, I was very intentional. Okay, I got to get to know everybody and let them get to know me. So we met for 4 weeks, and then COVID hit. I'm like, God, you are hilarious that you would have me in this position starting a ministry where I don't really know people, and then I can't see them, meet them. I was anxious, to say the least, because I was afraid nothing would happen. How am I going to have access to the people, the families? God is good. He knows exactly what he's doing. The ministry grew during that time. We started to meet virtually on Sundays, and I feel that was actually one of the best times in middle school ministry history in Renaissance. The students were dialed in. I would get messages from parents like, what time is it? Where's the Zoom link? My kid wants to be on this. Leaders or volunteers were very much connected to the families. Even though we couldn't be in contact with each other, I would hear how they're having their own Zoom meetings. And there was even a volunteer who took it upon herself to tutor one of our students. Relationship building was happening. Discipleship was happening. It was amazing by all accounts.
Even with the students doing so much school online, they were still hyped.
They looked forward to it more than I was. Blown away. I was expecting the exact opposite, but they were happy to be there. But then on a personal side for myself, like I mentioned, my mom was being sick. She actually wound up passing away during that time. The pandemic was declared, or shutdown was declared on March 16th. My mom passed March 17th. That hit really hard. Forgive me if I get a little choked up. That hit hard just because, of course, losing your mom, but also not being able to be present. So it was a hard time. But I think in a lot of ways, of course, I was sad, I was angry. But there would be moments that I would be grateful that I'm in this position that forces me to look to Jesus when I didn't want to. Yeah. It forced me to look to Jesus. And though I couldn't be connected to the folk that might, encourage me, give me hugs or whatever, I found myself encouraged by my volunteers. I found myself encouraged by the parents who were diligently chasing after the Lord. It was my saving grace in a lot of ways. So we pressed on.
Yeah.
It was a crazy time too, because people were leaving the city like crazy. Now, once a month, I get an email from someone who's moving to another city. I'm moving because I got married, got a new job, got a school, whatever the thing is. It's great. Very few people stay in New York City forever, even locals. During COVID, especially in the early days, I felt like one day I got 10 emails. All of them said the same thing. This is one of the hardest decisions I've had to make. I love Renaissance so much, but we're moving to Memphis, Atlanta, Nashville, Austin, LA, wherever.
How did you feel when you read those emails?
Afraid. I was afraid that this was marking the end of the church. Are we going to be a community after? Are we going to actually be together? Because that's something that people are going to rally back to. So much unknown. As
you said, there's so many people who left. What do you think it meant for us to be here in New York through 2020 and 2021?
To a certain extent, for me, I feel like the disciples in John 6, like, where else will I go? You know what I mean? Like, I've been in New York my whole life. I love New York. I don't plan on ever leaving New York. But I think it meant for us, if we were going to be people who are going to be leaders in this community, that you don't just dip when things get tough. What was it like for you?
It was hard being at home with the kids nonstop, celebrating their birthdays and no one's around. That spring, they turned 2 and 5 in 2020.
Uncle Dennis, your uncle
My
died.
uncle passed away. My mom dropped him at the hospital and never got to see him again.
Yeah.
And asking people to pray for him as he was on a ventilator and having to tell them that he hadn't made it, having to grapple with those prayers not being answered in the way that we had hoped, and just being very angry, honestly, because it felt like in some ways the response to COVID was not handled well, and there could have been things that were different. And one thing, though, that was very helpful was when the shutdown began, I think I knew it was going to be really hard. So I made a very intentional decision to lean into gratitude. So every day I would try to post 3 things that I was grateful for, whether that was just that we were healthy, or that we had food for the kids, or that we played some game as a family, whatever it was, any kind of little thing. So just really trying to be intentional and leaning into some of that gratitude, I think, was very helpful. And I'm grateful for COVID from the perspective of learning and being really confronted with how quickly things in life can change.
Yes, Lord.
And the need to pivot. That was the word, pivot. But I really hang on to that now, even 4 years later. If we are taking a trip and we get the email that says your flight has been canceled, I'm
cool.
Okay, we'll pivot. Like, COVID really just was a smack in the face to plans and things you thought you were going to do, weddings we thought that were going to happen. Just so many things were not the way we thought they would be. And I've tried to hang on to that because even in the midst of all of that transition, God had his hand on us. God was in control. God kept us. And so let me just hold on loosely. I think, what is that passage in James?
Why do you say tomorrow we will do this or tomorrow we will do that? Don't you know that your life is just like a mist, a vapor?
Yeah.
Instead, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will do this, we will do that. It's funny, my grandmother used to always say, Lord willing, I'll see you Sunday. I'm like, Grandma, like the restaurant, we have reservations. And she insisted on saying, Lord willing, if should the Lord allow, I'll do that. And I used to think she was doing too much. And now I get it.
You made the decision pretty early into the pandemic that we're going to take up an offering for people who are in need. Everything was about stop the spread of the virus. We came up with this campaign, We Spread Love, asking people to contribute what they could, knowing that so many people had lost their livelihood.
I remember talking to some friends and them telling me I was crazy. This was before that PPP loan came through and all that other stuff, you know what I'm saying? So it wasn't like we were financially balling. I remember talking to some friends and saying, yeah, we're just going to take up an offering and give it away. They were like, that's interesting. In a time of the most financial insecurity, you're going to raise money to give it away. And I was like, yes. I just really do feel like I sense the Lord saying, trust me. Trust me with your resources. Trust me with the community. Trust me. Like, just trust me.
This is Drew Hyun, lead pastor and founder of Hope Church NYC, and a key leader among churches in the city and the emotionally healthy discipleship movement.
I remember during the pandemic, actually, I asked Jordan if he would just share what they were learning in the midst of the pandemic. And he shared with a number of different pastors across the city about this generosity campaign that Renaissance did. I was so blown away by it and so challenged in such a significant way by Jordan, his vision for generosity and living into generosity in the midst of one of the darkest times of our city's history. I think that very much embodies what Jordan and Jessica and Renaissance are like and their place in the city as a beacon of wanting to create this sense of family, generosity, justice, mercy, and the good news of Jesus in all of its beautiful form in Harlem and beyond.
We raised over $100,000 to give away, and shout out.
136,000.
Wow. Shout out to those deacons, because remember, we just trained a new batch of deacons. We only had one in-person training for these new deacons, and then the shutdown happened, and they immediately were thrust into full-time labor to disseminate the funds, talk to people, counsel people through. Yo, those are some real ones.
This is Caleb Hill. He was a core team member and previously a deacon at Renaissance.
Deacons were not very prevalent in the church that I grew up in, and not in the form that we operate with. It was somewhat of a new concept of having volunteers whose responsibility is to look after the felt needs of the community and try to be an instrument of mercy. I was in that first cohort, and we spent a lot of time ironing out the details of what it meant to be a deacon, and as practical as saying, this is how you would visit somebody in the hospital. So it was a blend of what is a deacon biblically, roles and responsibilities, all the way to very practical steps of what it would mean to actually do the work of mercy and justice in the neighborhood. We had to figure out how to do all of this virtually. Personally, my job requires me to do a lot of looking into the future. I had moments of breakdown in advance of everybody else based on what I was doing at work around what could be the economic and financial impact of the pandemic. And so I think I had gotten through a lot of my darker moments earlier. By the time we got to the point where we had the We Spread Love campaign and the deacon work, I was a little bit on the other side of that and anxious to get people what they needed quickly because the needs were very acute. It was people all of a sudden not getting a paycheck, and they may have weeks of cash to pay bills, and the needs felt like if we weren't responsive and on top of it, there would be a lot of suffering that could have been avoided. And so it felt a time to be responsive and to be diligent, and we felt emboldened to be generous back to our community because we knew that was why everyone had given, and there was no shortage of need.
Here's Wendell Wilson, core team member and currently a deacon at Renaissance.
I think one of the things we always talked about in my household anyways was just like how there was always these churches here, but it didn't feel like we could always get help. I felt like Renaissance in that time were actually not just talking about being in the neighborhood and helping people in the neighborhood. They were walking the walk. And so I just felt honestly like a very small part of that. I took pride in it very much. Hey, I'm happy to be in a position where I can help some people and help some things. Well, the church is doing it, but it felt good to be from Harlem from that standpoint. It felt good to know that the church and the community I was a part of at that time was like really caring from the community that I was from. Like that meant a ton to me. I look back on that and I'm super proud of what Renaissance did in that time.
That was an epic time for our church where there's so much uncertainty. We want to spread the love of God in tangible ways.
Yeah, and I think it's such a testament to the human tendency to draw inward and focus on survival. Renaissance as a church community could have done the same thing, could have said, people are leaving, we're stuck in the house, what do we need to do to survive, and become more insular. I think it was so powerful that in that moment we chose to be focused on our community and look outside of ourselves. And God really used that to do something beautiful. If COVID wasn't enough, then the country experienced another earthquake moment.
Yeah, I experienced another earthquake moment. George Floyd really did break me in some ways. I didn't watch the whole video. Just the 5-second snippet that I saw did something deeply to me. I was enraged to a point that had I been free to be outside, I don't know what I would have done. The only thing I could do is just vent a little bit on social media, probably post some things that were a little bit too spicy, And that was a toned down version of how I was truly feeling. I remember thinking about the images of them burning down the precinct and people being mad. And I'm like, y'all mad they burning down buildings? They killed this man. They've been killing black people for hundreds of years. And y'all are worried about a building? Nah, get out of here, man. And just being furious and hopeless and not knowing what to do. And this is really one of the biggest paradoxes of leadership. To have the opportunity to preach when you have nothing to say. That Sunday is coming up and there are people that are hoping for a word of hope, comfort, guidance, direction, solace, peace, understanding, whatever it is, and you truly have no idea what to say. There's nothing inside of you that feels worth sharing. And so that was a very difficult time that I really went back to the interview we did with Cousin George. Cousin George was the patriarch of my family, although he had no kids. That interview we did when he was 97. I read the questions that you asked him, Jess, about what was it like growing up in the South, KKK in your backyard. And honestly, man, I had to borrow strength from him.
It's probably important to explain what was going on that week. Typically in that time, because we were doing online service only, you would record your sermons on a Tuesday.
Yep.
It would be edited along with the announcements and worship for the day, put together, and then available for viewing on a Sunday morning. You had recorded the sermon for that coming Sunday. We had actually gone away.
Right. We got an Airbnb with my brother and his family.
Yep. We were a pod, and this was our first chance to get out of the city and get a little bit of fresh air. So we went away to a lake house with them. And in the days following, while we're up there, George Floyd, it had been announced that he'd been killed, but then the video comes out.
Right.
And it's on full display.
Right.
What actually happened.
Right.
That he was murdered in the street.
Yes.
And so then you drive 2 hours back to Harlem because you're like, there's no way the sermon I recorded on Tuesday is what can be shared on Sunday. I don't know what I'm going to say, like you said, but I know that ain't it.
We were doing a series on Philippians, and the sermon that week would have been on friendship from Paul and Epaphroditus. I remember thinking to myself, if we show a sermon on friendship the Sunday after people are traumatized and overwhelmed with the murder of George Floyd, I would leave this church. Joe reset the studio back up and reshot a whole new message. I borrowed the strength and wisdom from people who have gone before me. But it was tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that there's the unique perspective that we experience as people in ministry, like being Christians, being in the church, Christianity in America, and George Floyd, and the interlacing of those two things was also really interesting because we were unified as a church in New York City, in Harlem.
Big time.
But we were very much seeing how Christians across America were responding oftentimes in very different ways. Some were responding in similar ways, but it was just, there was a wide spectrum to how people were responding. And in many ways, I think we were so grateful for the groundwork we had laid as a community with our Gospel and Race series that it wasn't the first time we were having to or had wanted to talk about race and how it intersects with how we follow Jesus.
Yeah, so even like we did the workshops that summer, Dr. Angie Sims, she did a workshop, Dr. Sarita Lyons did a workshop. And I remember for Dr. Sims's one, like 200 some people showed up and were on that Zoom for hours. And I felt like it was God's grace to have the people in our community and people connected to our community to lead. I reached out to Dr. Sarita Lyons in Philadelphia about how do you deal with chronic anger. We were preparing for the resource we were bringing to the church, like how do you heal from racial and racialized trauma and racism. She says, Jordan, before we bring this to the church, how are you doing? And I said, Doc, I've been so angry for so long. And she says, anger is not an emotion that can be carried for that long. Ultimately, there's very likely something else that is the primary emotion that you haven't yet dealt with. And when she said that, it felt like she was reading my mail. And I remember thinking to myself, what is that emotion? And then she says, it might just be fear and sadness. And I remember hearing those words and like a dam breaking, and then just being so terrified for the boys, terrified that they could be unprotected. And in those moments, I'm not really worried about my own life. I wasn't worried about me. I was worried about them. I realized that so much of my anger was just unprocessed fear and sadness. The sadness for George Floyd's family, sadness for every extrajudicial murder that doesn't get news coverage, sadness for everybody from Emmett Till backwards, the lynchings. Yeah, it was just sad. It was like a wave, a crushing sadness. It was just so much to try to lead a church through that.
Yeah, it was so much.
This is Cedra Sebastian. She's a community organizer, activist, and has decades of experience with nonprofit organizations.
I heard about George Floyd being murdered. I immediately went to all outlets to get more information, but I realized quickly that I might end up watching the video that had been circulating, and I just didn't have it in me. I'm a New Yorker. I remember what looking at video of Eric Garner did to me for weeks, for months, for years. So I tuned off from social media and really thought about what it meant to engage in community in a different kind of way. Jordan had reached out to me because a group of pastors wanted to organize a march, because he knew of my work as a community organizer working with young people and families, and that I had organized marches or brought folks out to marches, and wanted me to talk with some of the pastors about what they should have in mind. What I didn't know then was that was the beginning of Pray March Act, the Christ-based, justice-centered organization that grew out of what was happening in the spring of 2020. I spoke with the pastors, and before I got to the logistics, I got to the personal. I talked about how I was feeling, the impact I saw in my community, in my family and friends circle, and how important it was for us to have spaces to express that and use that as fuel, how we can build the tools that we need as Christ followers to be doers of justice in our everyday lives, to do something proactively. Later in that summer, I was reached out to participate in this series around race and justice. One of the things that I often hear was a lot of righteous anger from folks, and also not knowing what to do. And so my focus for that conversation was to give space for people to share the grief and also turn to the doing, right? And to help people think about not just big national level changes that need to happen, but what is it that we can do in our day-to-day? What is it that we must do with ourselves first? What is it that we must do within our family and friend circle? What is it that we get to do in our church community together? What is it that we do in the places that we work? How is it that we are seeing our neighbors as our neighbors? And how do the things that we shift in our everyday become a community change, become a city change, become a national change? I really appreciate this space to engage members of Renaissance in that conversation, but also in helping to support the growing of Pray March Act and be a part of Renaissance role in that growth. I'm so grateful to be a part of a church community that is not only concerned about the health of the body of Christ, but also the community that we live and work in.
Our community was really like a blessing in that point to me too, because I didn't know what to do or to say, but I knew we had people in our community that really were like solid leaders that could lead us through. George Floyd's murder prompted us to really reclaim that conversation and make sure we were having it in a good way that was healthy.
To be a safe place for Black and brown people in that time was important because I think that's sometimes a limitation for other multicultural churches. It's we're all here together, but when something like a George Floyd happens, the tendency for Black and brown people to feel isolated or even go back to their childhood church. Like, I'm not even going to go to my regular church this Sunday. I'm going to go back home to where I feel like I'll be seen, I'll be nurtured, I'll be taken care of. For people to feel that at Renaissance in that time, I think was just so important and a real gift.
I didn't want to rush people through the emotions that they were experiencing. I felt like it was most helpful to let people actually say how they truly were. I wrote a resource for our white brothers and sisters on how do they like truly investigate and evaluate internalized racism inside their own lives, and to say there's so much shame attached to race and racism. How do you actually process that? You don't process it just by pointing the finger at the people across the country and saying they're racist, they're bad. The first work starts with you internally. So I think there's a lot of growth that came out of that. Yeah. And God's grace was with us. We had a lot of people. Shout out to Lester. Lester, in a lot of ways, is like my big brother. He's always talking about when he retires. So Lester, when you retire, I'm retired. We're leaving together. Because in so many ways, he's there. Lester is, in many ways, so meaningfully involved in the life of the church. He pastors people so well, teaches people so well, leads people so well. One of his additional duties is just for me specifically. And I really think that the Lord sent Lester to Renaissance for the church, but also for me. And in that moment, relying and leaning on Lester for his presence, his stability really held me down in real ways, to be honest.
Yeah.
Even though George Floyd was a miserable time, that's when we realized collectively that if you're outside, the virus really doesn't spread like that. So you can actually do stuff outside and it's not really that much of a risk to spreading.
Yeah. Shout out to people on the staff who continue to work to find ways to bring people together. We had an outdoor social in the park that felt
big thing.
Seeing long lost relatives after 20 years, just to see some people that you knew, friendly faces from church all together.
We did the ice cream socials in front of Sugar Hill on Lennox.
Yeah, we did ice cream socials. Tanya led a virtual VBS camp.
Oh, wow,
She was dropping off supplies and swag to different families.
We had 95 children enroll in our virtual summer camp that summer. And we had a drawstring bag that had everything for that child. I had a studio apartment at the time, and it was filled with 95 kits that we were sending out. I remember one day I slept on the couch because my bed was completely covered and I didn't want to disrupt because I had it completely in order and I didn't want to mess up my order. And so I had stuff everywhere, but Marie came with me, and for 2 days she had it all mapped out as to the best route to get to everybody most efficiently.
That's very Marie.
We had a number of families that were in other states. And so we also went to the post office and we shipped them off to other states. It was so much fun playing Santa. It was so much fun sending these packages and then being able to see the children. At the end of the day, their families would send us photographs from their day of summer camp. And I would put together a slideshow of how everybody had done the same activities and been in summer camp together. Because it was the whole thought of how do I help the kids see that even though we're distant, we're still in this together.
We also figured out how to do the toy store, how to keep that going and do that outside.
Right.
In the courtyard at the school.
Yes, we got a giant tent weighed down by these huge cinder blocks, and we had the toy store that early December, and that was a huge thing. It was crazy because with people leaving and people coming, the toy store was the first time I met like half of the volunteers. I've never seen them a day in my life. And then they're like, I've been watching since the start of the pandemic. And it's just like, oh, that's cool. What's your name? And they're like, we watch every week and we sign up, we're in DNA groups. So I've never seen them before because we were virtual until the toy store that year was the first time we were meeting people who would later become staples in our church, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, and that trend has continued where even today we meet people and it's our first time meeting them in person, but maybe they've been checking us out online for 6 months and they finally made the decision to come in person, which we always love.
So then February 2021, I remember Jordan calling me in the morning, he said, I can't believe that I have to tell you this, but Rachel has passed away. I was so confused. He was talking about a worship team member who I was very close with and who was just a very large presence at Renaissance. She had a big voice on the worship team, gave us old school gospel vibes when she would sing. She sat right down front and was a one-woman amen corner for Jordan for many years. I couldn't even picture Renaissance without her there. We were all still separated, and it made it that much more difficult. I had to call all the worship team members and tell them what had happened. We were just such a young church. We had never really dealt with a loss like that. We hadn't done funerals before as a church. We had not grieved together as a church. It's always more painful when the person is young. And then to add on top of that we couldn't be together, it just felt devastating. So then we scrambled to put together a funeral for her and figure out how to best grieve. Jordan had to do a lot of calling around because we didn't have a space to host a funeral. We got some worship team members together and live streamed it. The band all came. We hadn't seen some of the band members for close to a year, and they all came together. It was devastating, heartbreaking, and still now, 3.5 years later, we just still feel that loss. Every time we do a choir, I feel it most. The first choir back from COVID, we did a song that she had been asking me to do for many years. I didn't tell anyone at the time. That was just for me, knowing that she had wanted to do that. There was a song that I just couldn't do anymore because it is connected to her so deeply. Even this anniversary, I had conversations with a couple of worship team members who said, I just was thinking of her. She should have been here. So just still a big loss.
So from a church perspective, there's all this stuff going on externally in the world and trying to navigate, again, COVID and race relations in America and politics and missing friends who have moved out of the city, people that we thought maybe we were going to do life with longer. On the church side, organizationally, we had a small staff of about 6 or 7 people for a number of years. At the end of 2020, early 2021, Brandon and Portia came onto staff, and that really began to change and shift who we were as an organization.
I'm a visionary in terms of the organism of Renaissance, who we are as a body of believers. I have very little visionary capacity for what the organization of Renaissance could be. And Brandon really came in with a vision for what the organization could be and how we can have more impact, kingdom impact, with better systems in place. When Brandon came on staff as our executive director and eventually executive pastor, he put in some crucial key changes. That was the mark of moving away from mom and pop Renaissance of, yeah, if you want time off, just ask Jordan. And I'd be like, sounds good to me. Is it Easter? No. All right. Have a good time. You know what I'm saying? And Brandon was like, we should have a PTO system. And I was like, what is PTO? Because my professional experience before this was I was a privately practicing attorney. So I managed my own cases and calendar. I wasn't running a business.
You didn't have a boss.
I didn't have a boss.
Nor were you familiar with applying for a job.
Never.
Interviewing for a job.
Yeah, I've never interviewed for a job.
Yeah.
So now we've been like really on a different trajectory since that point. And it's been amazing, like removing myself from certain decisions and removing myself from certain processes. So by the time we like regathered, we were a different church.
I think that's been a real gift to Renaissance, that you've had the self-awareness to be able to say, this is what I'm good at, or this is what I'm passionate about. Here's what I'm not so good at, and to really try to build teams and people around those places where you're not as strong so that we can thrive as one body.
When we came back from the pandemic, I remember Jordan saying, this is a great opportunity for us to start from scratch. We don't have to do anything that we used to do. And so how can each of our departments grow? How can they really be elevated? We have resources. And does that mean we need to hire more people or contractors? I think all of us went into it thinking that way and thinking, okay, we're grown now. I can see that elevation that happened. I think our events got better. I think that the band got stronger. The entire youth department started because so many of those kids had grown up. And I think that there was some momentum that started to happen because we were excited to be back in the room. Brandon was there encouraging us. Jordan gave us free rein to think bigger and to think from scratch.
We do start to regather in 2021, first with an outdoor Easter service.
Yes.
Which felt almost like the second coming of Jesus himself.
It did. We shot a really beautifully shot online service because we knew we couldn't welcome everybody outside. We did some back at the napkin measurements on how many people could be in the courtyard safely, masked, socially distant outside. And we said, let's do 100 people per service. We did 3 services. And the funny thing is, it's like a joke that people at Renaissance, I love y'all. But y'all got to show up on time to things. It was like, I was sure we haven't gathered in 14 months. If the service starts at 10, people are going to be there at 9:41, ready, eager. It's been 15 months. It's Easter. And each service.
Where else do y'all have to go?
Where else do you have to go? Everything is closed. But I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Even though they were late, they were only like 10 minutes late. And people probably forgot how to get dressed, leave the house, take whatever method of transport. But that was like an amazing day. It gave me a glimpse and it gave me so much hope about, this is what it is. Just a very scaled down worship set, scaled down message, and just to be around people and linger outside and talk to people was such a beautiful day.
We start gathering. We can't come back to the school though, because the DOE still has not opened the schools. They are still shut down. Right. But it's May 2021 and we're feeling like, okay, just the way regulations and things and...
Yeah, so many people were vaccinated that the rates in New York City were like plummeting.
So we booked Harlem Parish on 118th Street.
Yep.
And had to figure out a whole registration system and cap the amount of people who could come.
It was 100 people
per service.
Yeah.
And we do 2 services.
Yep.
We figured out how to have kids in the basement, which was not the Renaissance Kids department's favorite thing at all. And we decided we were going to launch a live stream.
Oh yeah, that was the birth of the live stream.
So that everybody understands the distinction. We would pre-record, edit, and post a service. It's packaged, it's done, and we're uploading a video that people could then watch when they were ready.
We would go through the vocals and stuff like that, and it would be like a production. It was like a beautifully shot, edited production.
When we decided to regather in May 2021, we were deciding people would be able to go to the website or go to YouTube and watch the service live as it was happening.
Yeah, and I remember in the early weeks, like the first week I was coaching the preacher to be like, all right, so you want to look to the right and then look over to the left as you're looking at people in the room. Go right, camera, left, camera. And like you have to, because the majority of the people, they're not watching it from
the room.
The majority of them are actually on their couches right now. But it was energizing for me to still be in a room with people, to hear laughter, to hear some feedback. I was like, it's go time. We are up. And honestly, you always say this, I became a better preacher during COVID because that process of agonizing, thinking about what I wanted to say, why I wanted to say it, made me more refined and discerning. And then watching it back, we'd sit on the couch, the boys would be going crazy. But then I remember thinking to myself, Jordan, why didn't you just say this? Just say the thing that you came to say. Just say it. So even now, like when I think about my preaching, I'll just say, this is what I want you to get. And before, I don't know, I was trying to be too refined. Now I'll just say, this is what I really want you to pay attention to. And I'll just say the line that's like in big, bold letters. And it's helped me to become more clear in my communication.
We were eventually able to get back into the school. And that really felt like a homecoming. It also felt really great that the staff at PS 76 was so excited for us to come back. I think that just speaks to the value that our relationship with the school has brought.
Yeah, we moved back in July of 2021. And I remember one of the first Sundays we were there, seeing one of the custodians wearing a Renaissance t-shirt. Not ironically, just because that's what he was wearing. They're comfortable. They're very comfortable t-shirts. And it really did feel like we were wanted to be back, and Principal DeBerry and all of the staff and everybody, really a deep love for them and vice versa. So that was like a beautiful testimony to the relationship that's been built, but still full of its challenges.
Yes. And so we got back in person, and
I didn't know anybody.
Talk about that. I know.
I thought that the homecoming service would be like a big celebration. And in some ways it was that, but then it also was like the church that we had in 2019, early 2020 is just different than the church we have now. Of course, there's still a lot of pre-COVID people, but the proportions were just so different.
Yes.
So we'd be in a room for a service, and if there was 150 people in the room, I'm like, I know 50 of them, but 100 of them, I have no idea who they are. And it was just a wild place, because we always have a lot of new people in Renaissance. Every week we have 10 or 15 new people.
It's probably likely that in a New York City church, there is almost a very large turnover every 5 years because people are moving in and out. We may have experienced some of that anyway.
Of course, yeah.
But certainly coming back and meeting in person, the number of people who had found us online, because it had never been easier all of a sudden to visit a new church. And a lot of people had found us. A lot of people had found us through the gospel and race stuff that we were doing. And yes, it was coming back in, and people had been watching you online and they feel like they know you.
Right.
Now we're finally in person and getting to meet these people face to face. And it was just a really surreal experience.
Yeah, surreal is a good word, but also very exciting. And we built back up slowly. Those first number of months in July were not exactly Easter level crowds or anything like that. There was a lot of space in PS 76, I'm sure, but it built back up slowly but steady.
This is Ian Quinlan, a deacon and key leader at the church who started attending in 2021.
So I'm a COVID baby. I came to Renaissance during the pandemic, as many others did. And I was supposed to have an interview and a photo shoot, and the makeup artist was a last-minute replacement. And while I'm there, the makeup person was like, so I hear you say you're a pastor's kid, and where are you at with your faith? I was like, oh yeah, I'm very much a Christian, and I'm looking for a new church, in fact. And she said, I go to Renaissance. That person happened to be Elisa White, and we got to talking, and she was awesome and terrific. And so I took that as a sign that I was supposed to come to Renaissance, which was great. I remember coming to church for the first few weeks. I was crossing the front of the auditorium to switch to go to the other side, and Mr. Rice pulled me over. He was like, hey, come here. I was like, hi, sir. And he's like, Elisa told us you're an actor. That's really cool, man. We watched some of your show. It's really nice to meet you. It's great to have you here. And so the idea that people were looking out for me and trying to make sure I felt welcome was pretty awesome. I really love that. That's definitely one of the reasons why I decided to stay.
This is Brian and Matthew again.
My friend finally made me come in person. I really didn't want to go. I was going through a lot of changes in my life at the time. I was going through a really traumatic and heartbreaking breakup. I was doing a year and a half of just watching online, doing my own thing, being my little island. She and I had gotten lunch the week before that I had come in person, and she just encouraged me, and she reminded me that we don't do life alone and that we're not made to do life alone. I remember walking into PS 76, and the first person I see is Lester. And Lester said, hello, welcome to Renaissance, asked me if it was my first time here, and I said it was. And he's told me, yeah, walk down the hallway and there'll be greeters there. And I remember that the first impressions person was Shayla. And she was just so lovely and sweet and welcoming. And I expected that. I expected Lester and Shayla to be kind. That Christian niceness I expected. But it wasn't the Christian niceness that I was experiencing. Neither of them knew me at all. But they were just so loving and sweet and kind. And I just felt very comfortable. And I remember going in and going through the service and going back to this rhythm of, oh, I get to worship with other people in public. And I always say a year and a half later of just sitting at my house watching Renaissance, I finally walk into those doors at PS 76 and I knew I was home.
Here's David Moon, a native New Yorker. He started attending in 2021 and is on both the prayer and teardown crews.
When I first moved back to the city, I definitely had in mind a multi-ethnic fellowship, just given the nature of the work that I was in and also my network of friends coming out of school. I was actually recommended to go there by my father, who had heard of Jordan in terms of new up-and-coming pastors preaching to diverse congregations. And honestly, I can say from the jump, I was definitely blown away by how friendly people were. The ways in which I felt fed spiritually, but also that there was like a clear care for the community and the people around in the neighborhood. And I would say that's still what keeps me coming back to Renaissance. The sermons are always very applicable without giving up their theoretical integrity. And I only appreciate even more deeply the ways in which Renaissance has grown into a church that is always seeking to feed us more. It's easier for me to be selfless and want to give when I see that the pastors are doing it so much. When I think about the foundations courses that we offer, or emotionally healthy spirituality and relationality and those sort of things, I definitely see a church that wants to give. I see a church that is invested in its members, and I see a church that's really looking to put God before everything else and modeling that from the top down. I would also say that when I walk in on Sundays, I really feel like I'm home. I know the security guards. I know Lester, always mess around with him a little bit, speak a little bit of Korean, dapping up Jordan or Aswan. I feel like I know everybody. It feels like family. And the countless people that I've met over the years, it's a place where I feel like I could bring my friends in. I know that they're going to be welcome.
Once we came back and we're in a groove, we also just expanded our groups. We still were doing the groups virtually, I think, for a time, the DNA groups. But then we also added in this component of a growth group. Can you talk about the idea behind that?
Since the beginning of Renaissance, we had a model, because we were smaller too. We just offered one thing to do. It was like, if you want to be in a community group, join a community group. There was no like, there was just men or just women. Right. It was like, there was one type of thing you could do. Yeah, shout out to Pastor Brandon. He was saying our church is large enough now to offer different things at the same time because people have different needs, and our church is mature enough to handle those different needs. And that was like really helpful and a blind spot that I had, to be honest. And so we offered growth groups where we can give people different experiences of discipleship on different tracks because some people were needing different things. And really, I did stumble into my favorite thing at Renaissance, which is to teach the foundations course in January. And so that was like a really helpful thing to think about differentiated models of how we bring discipleship. And foundations course is a class all about the foundations of the faith, 4 weeks in person. We limit it to about 80 to 90 people, but it really is like my favorite time at the church. But so now, we got the growth groups are just like a special opportunity we have now to be more specific to content that we do.
Yeah. We also did a special podcast series, a Real Love series.
Oh, that was dope.
And that was really fun. That was interviewing folks related to this sermon series that we were doing all on relationships of different kinds. And I think a lot of people joined the church that way, hearing that podcast, or in the very least, a lot of people were excited to share that series with people outside of New York City, which was very cool.
Yeah, because Sunday mornings, we don't have time and space to spend an hour talking to a couple who navigated through infertility challenges and like what that's done to them personally and relationally. People just identified so much with the variety of stories we were bringing. Someone who had been divorced and people who had kind of just gone through really difficult times and people who went through really happy times. So it was like a really big assortment. And I felt like our community was so blessed to feel represented in the variety of stories that we were doing, which is just a very big limitation on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, I'm so grateful every time someone has allowed us to share their story more widely, because I do think that it is such an incredible blessing and help to people in the community. But then I also know what it's like to want to share a part of your story, but you're like, it's not really fully resolved. I'm still praying to God about this thing. I am still struggling with this thing. And
that's the beauty of scripture, though. People read the stories of people in the Bible and they're messy, and a lot of times they don't end cleanly. Like even the story of Peter, I think about, his life was just such an up and down thing. He rejects Jesus, and then he's reinstated and preaches a sermon, and then he's like harboring issues against Gentiles. He has to be corrected. He's not like the hero. Like the Bible doesn't present heroes. The Bible presents people and how they met Jesus and encountered the love of God. The point of the story is not the like nice, neat end and they ride off to the sunset, but God deals with messy people.
And in 2023, we did something again really big, hosting our first in-person vacation Bible school.
Oh yeah, I was a volunteer. The arts and crafts table that I did was not something that should ever be reproduced, but I did my best.
You didn't do a good job, did you?
I did not do a good job. I had fun with the kids, though. They had fun.
It was a phenomenal time. Our kids were there, and to see the number of adults in our community volunteering and introducing kids to Jesus in really fun and meaningful ways was fantastic. Yeah. So shout out to Tanya and her vision. Again, it was such a win for her because she also has been in the trenches with us since the very beginning. And I know that having Vacation Bible School was always a dream of hers. And that just feels like such a marker to get to see God's promises fulfilled through that opportunity. Also, for you in that time, I think you were maybe struggling a bit. I remember you from the stage talking about your desire for pastoral mentorship.
Yeah.
What were you experiencing during that time?
Some of the loneliness of when you're confronted with difficult decisions and you don't have anybody to really run it by. And not like I didn't have staff. I had you, obviously, to talk to. I was talking your ear off about everything. But then to have someone with wisdom and experience that can say, hey, I hear what you're thinking. Have you considered these things? And I was really hoping and praying to God. And really, God heard that prayer. It was a delayed yes. And really, through shout out to my boy Drew Hyun, got connected with Pete and Jerry Scazzaro. Even though we had done their course in 2014, we didn't know them.
So then in 2022, they started doing the emotionally healthy discipleship courses online for leaders.
That and really benefited and started to deepen our own discipleship. And some of this was also based on need. Like I really, during COVID, even realized like, oh, I have a lot of unprocessed sadness and grief that I don't even know really how to access that stuff. And I've been in therapy since my late wife passed away, so it wasn't like I'm unaware of processing difficult emotions. But as it pertained to like me in ministry and sadness and how do I lead, I knew that lead from a point of integrity. And I've always thought about like integrity being this thing of like, I use money and my body in godly ways. And that's definitely a part of integrity. I'm not lying. I'm not stealing money from the bank. But integrity is so much more than that. It truly was leading from a place of wholeness, that like who I am on the inside, I'm actually on the outside. Really the biggest gift I can give to the church is integrity. And so I realized, I need to just know what's going on inside. I can't take people somewhere where I'm not willing to go. I can't help people if I'm swimming in a shallow pool. So we definitely deepened our relationship with emotionally healthy discipleship and how we process the totality of our lives. And then retaking the class made me alive and awake to so many things that I'd known in theory, but now I was like, oh wow, to truly grieve your losses and to give yourself permission to grieve your losses, stuff like that. I was just like so healthy for me.
Yeah, you are wanting to help so many people, and at the same time, you have to be sober about your limitations, that you can't live life for other people. You cannot make decisions for other people. And if you take responsibility for everyone's decisions and actions, you're going to find yourself in a very miserable place very fast.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of people who burned out and left the ministry or left their churches because of overextension. And EHD was really helpful to put some things in place to not do that.
I think related to that, there are a lot of things that have gone so well with Renaissance in the last 5 years or the post-COVID years. And simultaneously, there's been a lot that has happened in our lives personally.
Yeah, it's been rough.
That has been really hard. I am grateful and will say our marriage has really been a respite, I think, and stabilizing force in the midst of those personal challenges. But those challenges have remained, and I think that they've shaped the way we've led at Renaissance. What do you think about that?
Yeah, even thinking about my own health challenges, I've had migraines my whole life. Most of the time it's been manageable, but last year it really hit a chronic point to where I used to have 2 or 3 migraines a year, and I was having 3 or 4 a week. And I would spend countless hours on my back in the room just thinking in misery, this can't be good. It just kept on getting worse and really hitting a point to where going to the hospital and different things and just being pretty terrified that my life now was going to be characterized by a chronic illness and managing a chronic illness. And then talking to the neurologists and different things and hoping to get me back to a point of like 90% and it no longer being a thing of I'll be 100%. Like that ship has sailed a little bit and it's what is going to be manageable for you. And then that really has truly forced me to receive the awkwardly wrapped gift of limitations. It is a gift from God. There's an old quote from Charles Spurgeon that said, I have learned to kiss the waves that throws me against the rock of ages. And neurological health and disorders, it's a wave and it throws you against the rock. And I'm learning to kiss the wave, to be grateful for the wave that brought me against the rock of ages. I would sit in the bed sometimes and just be praying like, Lord, there's so many things on my to-do list that I'm just not even close to doing today. But I do hope that I just need to rely on you to study this thing because I can't do anything. I'm on my back. If I try to open my eyes, it's going to be a nightmare. So I would just lay there and pray.
Yeah.
This is Mike Kelsey, a good friend of Jordan and Jessica, and lead pastor of McLean Bible Church in the DC metro area.
Jordan is the most emotionally healthy man I know in my life. I think what God used Jordan to do was awaken in me a desire to get more healthy, to know it is actually a good and desirable thing to be in touch with how you're doing and how you're feeling and what's happening inside, and to be intimately connected with the people that you love and not just stay on the surface. His own physical challenges have been maybe one of the most recent things I've watched him go through. That can humble you, especially in your early 40s, when you have real physical challenges that cause you to make some adjustments in your life. It makes you not only have to cope and adjust physically, but it makes you just think about life differently. Watching him have some low moments of discouragement, but also watching him endure and just figure it out and trust God. Yeah. So those are some of the things I've seen.
And to this day, I feel like I've embraced my limitations and not preaching too many weeks in a row anymore, taking time off, going to bed on time. Just saying it, when it's done, it's done.
I think also the challenges we've experienced have, not that we were necessarily prone to see ourselves as the saviors of all things, but I think it's also just been grounding to, as you said, embrace those limitations and know that we are in need of care, just like everyone who's a part of Renaissance.
One of the things that I learned from my therapist, I've always heard people say, you got to put yourself first sometimes. And I'm like, I'm not ever going to do that. I'm never going to put myself first above my kids. They're little, they are very needy people. I can't put myself in front of people in the community at Renaissance who really need guidance and care and friendship and support. To put myself first just always felt very like wrong for a number of reasons. And then she said something that was really helpful to me. She said, Jordan, I want you to count yourself in to the community of care. You don't have to put yourself first, but just put yourself in. Just say there's 19 people that need something and you're number 19. Just count yourself in. You need to make sure that you're being cared for. And the migraine storm that, thank God, as of the time of this recording, I haven't had a migraine in 4 months. But when it was really fully active, I had to say, oh, it was a shift to say I need to count myself into the community of care. So much so that for the first time in the history of Renaissance Church, I went down to the front for prayer for me, not for somebody else, standing in proxy, not for like wisdom. Like, I am discouraged. I am going through like chronic illness and I'm really discouraged. I'm sad. I don't know what to turn to. And I just need help. I need prayer. And thank God for the amazing prayer team at Renaissance who prayed for me. And I don't know what it was that was keeping me from prayer. I didn't want people, I think it's the same thing that keeps a lot of people from prayer. I don't know. I don't want people looking at me thinking about, why am I up here? What's going on in my life? I don't want people in my business. And the Lord had to break that for me and say, just go for the common grace of prayer.
Yeah.
And the words from the prayer team that day have really carried me in a lot of ways since then.
So here we are celebrating 10 years of Renaissance Church. What are you feeling?
Excited. I feel like there's times and there's moments when I get really excited to share with people what I've been thinking about for years. And I finally have the confidence to share about it and talk about it. And I really do feel like a boldness that has entered my body and into my spirit to like move forward with something that's new and different. So I'm excited.
Did you feel that way when you were launching Renaissance? Was it something you had been thinking about and dreaming about for years, and then you were to this point where you finally got to share about it with people?
Yeah. I think when I was leaving prison ministry, the work that I was doing, I felt like I was being helpful. And in a lot of ways, I did think about doing that for the rest of my life, that this could be a ministry that I could do. And I just felt like the Lord was saying, this is good. This is not bad what you're doing now, but there's something different, something more that I want you to do. And so in some ways, this kind of feels like that more on a corporate level than just a personal level of being invited into more. And so, yeah, very exciting.
Looking back on 10 years, what are some of your big takeaways?
Looking back on 10 years, the big takeaway is when the momentum of the Holy Spirit is behind you, you can do so much more than you thought you could. And when things are small, do not despise small beginnings. Like, small, healthy things are amazing. Like a small endeavor, ministry that you're doing that's like helping people and it's like healthy, it's incredible. And so, yeah, to not despise those small things because they grow into like really healthy things. And not that size is the litmus test at all. But in the first year, I spent a lot of time comparing myself to other people. And in the years to follow, I would just put my head down and just worry about faithfulness to the Lord. And man, like, to see the result of the compound interest of faithfulness is pretty incredible.
God has been so faithful over the last 10 years, but hopefully this is only the beginning of the story for Renaissance. We are in a season of truly seeking God's will for our community, and next episode, we will hear from a chorus of people as they share their hopes and dreams for our church. Plus, we will hear more details about the vision God has given the leaders of this community and where He may be taking us. I hope you'll join us for our final episode.